you remember the final year of the Trump administration where we had the Abraham Accords, we had several Arab nations in the Middle East making alliances with Israel, and there was talk that Saudi Arabia might be next. Saudi Arabia distancing themselves from the other power player in the Middle East, Iran. They saw Iran and their mullahs as an existential threat to the region, and Saudi Arabia was on the verge of creating an alliance with Israel. Boy, oh boy, how things have changed. Over the weekend, we've learned that Saudi Arabia has now renewed their diplomatic relationship with Iran, brokered by China. Now what? And what else can the Biden administration mess up from what they inherited? Joining us right now is the author of Iran, an Imperialist Republic and U.S. Policy, Walid Phares, who's also, by the way, foreign policy analyst for our friends over at Newsmax. Walid, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Larry, for having me today.
And was that the correct setup? I mean, it did. I remember Saudi Arabia very concerned about Iran, and they were making noise that they would normalize relations with Israel. What a difference 2 years makes.
A huge difference. It's almost 20 years of difference because we put so much effort, even before the Trump administration, even under the Bush administration, but mostly the Trump effort to bring the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and of course, Egypt, and all of what was called or baptized as Arab coalition. We all remember in 2017 when President Trump addressed 51 Muslim Arab leaders and Arab president and king in Riyadh. So what happened between then and now? A change of administration here, as simple as that. The Biden administration went back to the policy of the Obama administration, which is a rapprochement. I would say even more, a collaboration with the Iran regime, and that did not go well with the Saudis, with the UAE, and with all our partners who have helped us not just by being part of the Abraham Accord, but also by fighting the jihadists, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the rest.
Yeah. And not only do Iran and Saudi Arabia, Walid, please educate me on this, they not only have historic differences politically, they also have ethnic differences, Persian and Arab. They also have sectarian differences. And they're both usually vying to be the strong horse in that region, aren't they?
Yes, they have been for 40 years at least, since the rivalry between Tehran and Saudi Arabia and Riyadh in this case. But Saudi Arabia's major problem with Iran, in addition to, as you just mentioned, that there are Shia and Sunni dividing line, they are Arabs and Persians dividing lines. But the real problem for the Saudis was the efforts by the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic, to change the regime in Riyadh. Yeah. What Iran has been trying to do since 1979 is to bring down that regime, the Saudis, and install a Hezbollah-like or a Houthi-like regime instead, and that would be catastrophic.
Well, and if I remember right, Saudi Arabia on the verge of making some kind of alliance with Israel, which would have been, I mean, unprecedented and historic. Much of that had to do with their own concern about the threat of a nuclear Iran, right? I mean, there's no doubt Iran will use nuclear weapons against Israel, but what's stopping them from using it against those who they think are defacing Mecca?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let me begin by a point just before that one, by saying that the Saudi leadership under Mohammed bin Salman and his supporters have done many things that most of the American public are not very familiar with. They actually have been reforming Saudi law, Saudi institutions. They disbanded those Wahhabi networks that were responsible for feeding Al-Qaeda and with ideology. They have been liberating women little by little. Now they can drive, now they can fly, they can go wherever they want. And of course, they engage in a massive development program across Saudi Arabia, and millions of tourists are heading there. Saudi Arabia was going in the right direction, and the outcome of it was a conviction in being convinced that they need to do peace with Israel. And as you just said, you mentioned a very important term. They were about to declare an alliance or cooperation with the Israelis. Right. And this policy, the Biden/Obama policy, destroyed it.
Well, the Biden administration not only just dropped the ball, but they've hidden the ball. They've destroyed the ball. Yeah. And on Friday, it's so important when it comes to, important, delicate foreign affairs and international alliances to be clear and coherent and strong. And I want you to see President Biden's performance. He was asked by a reporter at the end of a statement he made on Friday whether he would comment on the renewed diplomatic relationship. Let's watch this video if we could.
What are your thoughts on Saudi Arabia and Iran reestablishing diplomatic relations, sir?
Better the relations between Israel and their Arab neighbors, the better for everybody.
Will you sign the bill the House just unanimously approved?
Walid, he was asked about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and he said more alliances between Israel and his Arab neighbors. I mean, this is incoherent. It's like he doesn't know what he's talking about. This doesn't instill any kind of confidence here or in the Middle East.
It's getting stranger and stranger, Larry. I mean, even the political behavior of the White House, let alone the behavior of the president, that's another file, another dossier. Since they came to power, first thing they've done, the Biden administration, was to remove the Houthi, Iran-backed terrorists in Yemen, remove them from the terror list. What kind of message are you sending to Saudi Arabia? And then, of course, withdrawing from Afghanistan, transferring power to the Taliban. And these capitals in the Middle East were looking at us. What are we doing? And obviously, when we went to ask them, can you increase the product or the oil production and gas production, they said, okay, but can you help us not getting closer to the Iranians? I mean, they ask us something, we ask them something, we ignored them. So how can we blame them now if they want to have a normal diplomatic relationship? And by the way, not an alliance with Iran. And they gave them 2 months to change their direction. Our administration has done, in my view, major mistakes at this point in time in the region.
Yeah, I feel like, Walid, if before this administration began, I asked you to give me a list of things they could do to bolster Iran and further upset the Middle East, this would be the list. What about the China involvement here? Does that concern you that they were working behind the scenes to broker this?
China will go everywhere they can see a void. That's what they're doing. They're relaxed. They have our debts. They have trillions of dollars. Look what they've done in the Pacific Ocean. They went to the Salem Island. They are going to be establishing bases. They are going everywhere around. They are omnipresent, not just in the Middle East, but in Africa and Latin America. They have the cash, and they have an administration in Washington that is allowing them to do so. So obviously, when Iran and Saudi Arabia decided, okay, we're going to open these diplomatic relationships, China was the first one to come in. And I'm concerned that this is not going to be the end of it. China will be omnipresent in Iran. They will be helping the Iranian armed forces with technology, with long-range missiles and more. I mean, between now and New Year's Eve this year, many things are going to happen, and you and I will talk about it.
Just about a minute left here, but you mentioned oil, and this alliance actually is disconcerting with regard to world oil markets, I would think. We have an incoherent and weak energy policy here for the last 2 years. Will this further exacerbate oil prices and the strength of the Middle East OPEC conglomerates?
One thing will happen, another won't. China buying more Iranian oil, yes. They don't care about our sanctions. Iran even told us now to our face that they're making billions of dollars from China buying regardless of the sanctions. The other thing that is not going to happen is that the Saudis are serious about maintaining the right price, but they need to coordinate better with Washington. And actually, this administration, despite what happened, they need to coordinate better with our partners in the region as well.
One last question. You mentioned Hezbollah. Is there a tacit agreement here between these two countries where Iran can continue to fund terrorism as they've been doing unabated? Because the Saudis, as you mentioned, were actually getting better about that.
The Saudis have imposed conditions, if one would read the entire press release issued in Beijing and after that, on the Iranians, telling them to suspend their support to Hezbollah in Lebanon, to the Houthis in Yemen, and to the Shia militia, radical Shia militia in Iraq. Now, the expectations are that Iran won't do this. They will give peace for the time being to the Saudis, but they will continue elsewhere.
They've never adhered to any of these agreements. Walid Phares, thank you for joining us. I wish you were advising this White House, but maybe the next one. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.